esquerdo, que é a
Sim.
imagenzinha, e o nosso áudio.
Tá. Como é que eu
Tá.
vejo? Eu vou compartilhar aqui e pego o sinal, né? Ok, peguei aqui.
Isso.
Então, em inglês,
Em inglês já vai estar indo isso aí, e a nossa voz agora.
ia aparecer
E
na
aí,
sua voz.
isso, exatamente. Aí, se você
Você está
quiser que eu
vendo a tela?
tire.
Não.
Sim, tô vendo, tô vendo.
Se está viendo perfecto.
Tá, eu vou fazer agora a mesma coisa. Sim, eu vou fazer a mesma coisa na outra, né? Deixa eu voltar para lá. Não, não voltei. É,
Não, é que abriu uma nova guia.
sim,
Vai no transmissão ao vivo ali, a sua segunda aba.
é essa aqui, né?
Isso, aí
Então
ali
eu
você volta.
fechei aqui, vou para cá. É, eu preciso sair daqui, né? Por que que eu não saio?
Você pode clicar na abinha de voltar, ali em cima.
Qual?
Para voltar na página mesmo da internet. Pode voltar ali. Isso.
Ok, vou entrar no português
Certo? E vai fazer o
e
mesmo procedimento.
não está aparecendo aqui em cima
Não, é que ele
ativo.
ainda tá carregando.
Ah, tá bom. E eu preciso pedir para o Emanuele para ele entrar. Ah, pronto. Vou clicar aqui, ok?
Pode clicar.
É, e aí eu faço isto aqui, pego o link e clico aqui.
Exatamente.
Aí
Eu
a
vou
página
tirar
em português.
eu vou tirar todos os nossos áudios para não ficar vazando isso, tá? Depois eu coloco.
Javier.
Dime, Eduardo.
Ready to go, everyone?
A ver, está, vale. Un segundito. Muy bien. Muy bien, pues muy buenos días.
Good morning, everyone, and good afternoon. And great to be here. Our speakers on this seminar that will study on solution about energy transition. It's a great pleasure to greet you all and to share a part of today, October 27, 2022, to talk about the role of biofuel in energy management and the critical role they have, both in our region, in Latin America, and also in Europe and other places around the world. It's a type of very necessary energy for the process of transition of energy, the decarbonization of energy, and also from a social environmental standpoint. So first of all, I will pass the floor to the two presidents of the entities that call us for this seminar, Antonio Cordon, the president of the Association for the Energy Transition, and second, Roberto Sesson, the president of the Industry and Energy Forum. Mr. Antonio, please take the floor. Thank you, Javier. Good morning, everyone who's here listening to us from South American countries. For us, it's a great pleasure to use this opportunity to be able to talk about the transition of energy and all the derivatives that come with it in terms of proceeding with energy transition in any level of life. Our association was formed 2-3 years ago, and the idea was to serve as a mediator, specifically in all issues related to this topic, where we try to make solid all the big changes that will inevitably come through in such an ambitious process as the one of energy transition. As we started to work in this area, we did not fathom at the time the extent to which would be necessary to have mediation in these fields of work, as we believed that it was just an obvious process, as if we had a problem to have this decarbonization of our society and all the processes that come with it, as we have a need to get our society standing. Everybody would easily understand that it's necessary to carry out changes, and the changes come with consequence. But as we took steps forward, we realized that everything that is done brings more discussion and resistance to change. And the energy transition issue many times demands explanation. And I'm talking about extremely important and major politicians, and also those who work in agriculture, explain that the energy transition is the most important process that we have now in the world, and most likely it will be the most important in the whole 21st century, and that's something that people do not fully grasp. But once it is explained that you'll have to change the cars you drive, for instance, or your home with the specific conditions and the type of thermal insulation, heating, changing life habits, food habits, and there's so much more. And in the beginning, they just cannot grasp well, but gradually they do in Europe. And in your countries, I'm not sure how you see it, but Europe is going through winter with much concern when it comes to energy price. And there's a discussion that starts that go beyond what before was just theoretical, and it starts to really become something more concrete. We need to understand that energy transition will demand investment and in all different levels, individual, collectively, and all of that will not be fully understood. And the other thing has to do with fuel. When we talked about energy transition, there was a limitation to it. People did not understand that it was not just about electricity, but that within the whole scenario, with all the Paris Agreement and with the electrification by 2015, we will solve 50% of the energy problem. The other will be solved some other way, and definitely in any different level of discussion where we address the topic, there's resistance. In Spain here, there are issues that show paradox, as there are some specific mining of a very rare material when it comes to electrification and the energy transition. But our environmental legislation that were elaborated without the right process were restrictive and stop us from exploring these specific fields. And the others in terms of agriculture through the producers in many areas in Spain show that they are against any type of solar energy model or wind energy, saying that this is a problem that should go through another process. So there are many points that must be dealt with politically. And politicians also do not understand that there are many things that we must go through, because there were agreements signed, but to take this forward, it's important to carry out many reforms that will just change status quo and will definitely affect many. So civil society brings conflicts with that and has relationship with the application, I would say, of all these plans of energy transition. When it comes to biofuel, this is one of them. And all of us need to work, as a friend of mine says, which is the new illustration of the world. We need to make everyone understand that something that we just take it as a given with the energy, we must change. It came the time to understand this differently, where people must accept that this will not be possible without some changes in our own lives, in our association. We did go through many experiences, and we must say that at the end, when people do think about this topic and share information, at the end of the day, people understand what is needed to be done, and that all the policies to be drafted must take into consideration who is more impacted and find mechanisms for discussions that will allow people to understand that all of this is a benefit to people themselves. So the discussion of bioenergy has started. It is an iconic discussion. I don't know how you feel in your own countries, but in Europe, it is, and it has been discussed intensely because of the consequence of the Ukrainian war, and definitely when it comes to some of environmental legislation, which are very limiting, that in other countries there aren't. But here we've realized that it will be necessary to have much mediation, discussion, much thinking behind it, so that people, for instance, a person who was very relevant in our sector, who understands that, has said that there must be much criteria, but we cannot be taken away by fundamentalist principles. Otherwise, we'll never get there. And all of these discussions of the energy discussion, energy transition discussion should be taken into the fields of profit figures. Otherwise, it will be very hard to commit to the objectives of which we have been committed to, and to be able to discuss numbers and reasonable conversations. We'll need to get to another illustration of society, but this is a task that is hard for all of us to take on, and it's inevitable. We can't carry on with energy transition from specific position of demand and prohibition. That can be the case in China and other countries, but in democratic countries, it will be very hard to get there. We need the dialogue, we need to negotiate, and that is the path that our association has been paving. And we want to continue working that way, and everything we can do to help in terms of sharing our experiences to be available here for you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Antonio. Alberto, please take the floor. Good afternoon, Spain. Good morning, Latin America. Those who had an early morning, 9 o'clock. We hope you all who are here with us can have a great day with us. And I want to thank the organizers of this event. Antonio did mention things that did stand out to me, and I fully agree. And that's why the forum was born, as we understood that we needed much discussion in the process of energy transition. And the other point you mentioned is that we cannot reduce the debate to electrification. That is very important, because that's something that has quite the case for us and for the forum I represent. I mean, this definitely is the best moment ever to be able to talk to you in this event who are really committed to our industry. And that's how we started. Our forum was formed about a year ago when the whole situation in Ukraine impacted all our ideas and the energy world as a whole. And we stem from this idea of working as a meeting point to all actors that are part of the energy in our industry. The entities that are responsible for producing energy in the beginning are the most important, but now we understand that it goes beyond that. And the ones that regulate, and also the ones that are able to manufacture technologies, making it all possible. And within this process of transition, we believe that it's necessary to support technology. We cannot really undervalue any of the technologies, and definitely the biofuel is one of them, which is quite an important tool to ensure decarbonization of the industry, keeping its competitiveness. And that's very important. These are two lines that run side by side. It's important to talk about decarbonization, but at the same time, we need to talk about competitiveness, and all the steps that we will take forward must ensure this process of decarbonization and competitiveness. We have been talking about how it's important to reinforce public-private partnership. As we know, the agreement has already referred to the energy transition, and much of why we're here, and also the whole spirit of our forum, is that to work together, to discuss and have common goals. I have been convinced that events as this one will definitely help to pave the way for the transition, together with the ideas, technologies, and solutions. I believe they are out there. We just need to explain them well and have the willingness to apply accordingly. Definitely, as members of the forum, you are all invited to visit our website. And I would like to reiterate here that the work we must do is one that everyone should take part. We need to support each other. And we need to know that if we don't hold our hands together, all technologies, I mean, everything, it will really be hard to get there, to this energy level that we want to. So I believe this debate is important for us to take steps forward. So thank you very much, Alberto, for your words. And now let's start with our round table for this seminar, and then we'll have a final wrap up. The first table is comprised by the following members who are already on screen with us. First, we have Erasmo Carlos Batistella, Director of the Council of Aprobio Brazil. Second, Maximiliano Corsi, President of BioCap from Paraguay, and also Carlos Alberto Mateus, Legal Director of Fedel Biocombustibles in Colombia, and we will have also Zubiha Zaheta with us, President of Carbio from Argentina. We'll go for the first round of intervention, and after that, we will establish the first dialogue together. So let's have this first round be very brief as an introduction to the role of biofuel in energy transition, and specifically when it comes to how the biofuel is at this moment in all of your own countries. Corporate investment, innovation, when it comes to energy. So I'd like to pass the floor first to Erasmo Batistella. It's great to have you here. Good morning. Good morning, Javier. It's great to be here with all of you. Thank you for the invitation. I'd like to especially greet Antonio, Alberto, and everyone else who is here representing their own countries, their associations. I believe this is a historical day for biofuel in Latin America because we have 5 countries together with Spain, 6, talking about a very important topic to us, as we've already heard when we had the introduction of this event with the words of the forum and the association. So it's a great honor to be here talking about how is our view in terms of biofuel in Brazil. I am the president of biofuels, and we produce biofuels in Brazil. We have other biofuel partners that are together with us, with other 3 entities, representing also us in this forum. So to answer your question, Javier, Brazil is a big biofuel producer. We have a track record with ethanol that started back in the 70s. Biofuel started in 2005, 2008 in Brazil. And today we're the second largest producer of biofuel around the world, and specifically of biodiesel, which is the sector which we work in Brazil. We were in the past the second most important. Now we are down to fourth. We have a market of 6 billion liters for this year alone. And I can already say that we could even have a larger market in Brazil, because we would have at this moment a predictability of mixing 14% of biofuel in our diesel. And now we're only at 10%. All the different areas in Brazil have mentioned that. And when we observe biofuel, we have a very clear view of some of the points that we believe are extremely important to mention. First of all, we believe that biofuel are not a transition energy, but one of solution for climate change and also for the energy transition itself, specifically when we talk about Latin America, because Latin America has an ability to produce much raw material for low carbon, with great respect to the environment, and we have a great capacity of production of biomass, which is essential to biofuel. We have been defending that we must increase the production and consumption of biofuel. In Brazil, as I've mentioned, we have 27% of ethanol, 10% of biodiesel. But in Brazil, we believe there is a window of opportunity that is quite big, as we are large exporters of raw material. And we believe that agricultural condition is very important when it comes to the raw material that we will be using in biofuel. So we do have raw material to produce even more biofuel. And another important aspect is that today in Brazil, it's already very clear to farmers that produce the raw material that they are not only producers of food, but of food and energy, renewable energy, because part does go to renewable energy. So we want to increase the supply of food and clean energy, but we are advocating the fact that there should be more and more investment in Brazil and Latin America in public policies where we can bring to investors, all those who are involved in the supply chain, more predictability and legal guarantee. We know there is an advantage in Brazil, which is the introduction of biofuels that are advanced biofuel, urban mobility to reduce pollution in the big cities. And we have a great possibility also in air transportation. We believe that Brazil can have also a public policy that can start discussing this with other countries in Latin America, because when we have an airplane flying, to have a public policy where can see that as an opportunity of decarbonization in the air industry is a great opportunity for Brazil and for Latin America. I believe we will soon have a clearer view of that in this event, so that everybody can understand of the great opportunity that we have in Latin America to become, in the mid-run, clear policies and consistency when it comes to becoming the green Middle East to produce more and more clean energy. And to get there is essential to have public policies that can bring predictability and also legal assurance. I'm not criticizing anyone here. I'm just discussing the opportunity that we have. I realize, and I've been talking to many countries, and I realize that we've had this in Paraguay to produce biofuel that is advanced, the green diesel. So we know it's hard for companies to invest much sums when we talk about not having any type of hedge, that this will be consumed by the market. This is one of the main important things. So I know we will be able to talk more about this. And this is a model for Latin America because it's something that's more than that, can certify the quality of biofuel and social and environmental responsibility in the production of raw material for fuel. So that's why Brazil had to conclude here my participation and listen to my other colleagues. Brazil today is a reference when it comes to biofuel. But in Brazil, we have a great opportunity of transforming this country into a major biofuel exporter and helping even more the world in this energy transition. So we have a huge challenge ahead, which is to get to 2050 with 10 billion people around the world, with greater demand of transportation, of energy, of food, and having to reduce emission and temperature. That's why biofuel becomes very important to help bring the solutions. We are not the only solution. We need to incorporate a new technology that will demand the process, but today we are reality, and we need more support so that we can generate more value and more jobs in Brazil and Latin America. And as we have been developing also in a more sustainable manner. So thank you very much for this opportunity for representing the biodiesel sector, specifically here in a very important forum. I believe it will definitely be quite a milestone to us, and we're starting that here today together. Thank you very much. Definitely the intention and the reason why this seminar is being held is to be the kickoff to a co-joint work with many countries and many regions to favor the role of biofuel and also to answer some of the questions that have been arising. Thank you for your participation. Now, I'd like to pass the floor to Maximiliano.
Un honor poder participar y poder
It is to me a great pleasure and an honor to participate and to be able to talk about our view in Paraguay. I am an Italian businessman who's been in Paraguay for almost 8 years. And I like Paraguay. I like South America, especially because of the opportunity of the industrial and technological development that we have in terms of opportunity. Because in my country, Italy, this is actually saturated. And here we have a great room for evolution or development. As Mr. Rasmus mentioned, we have great availability in the whole region of raw materials that enables industrialization and also to actually create renewable energy. When we talk about grains, for example, soybeans, and also any kind of other product that may be seen and sold, we're talking about energy and food. And this is moving hand in hand because many times the public opinion does not understand. They are side by side. They move side by side because speaking of my business in Paraguay, we have an industrial complex where we have a soybean processing plant. It produces oil, but I'd rather say that it is a soybean producing plant because it also produces oil and biofuel, and also know that enhances food or actually feed. And so we are actually strengthening a food market, uh, also the renewable agenda. So I'd like to highlight that both are moving together and strengthening. Here in Paraguay, as well as in other countries, we have a replacement in broad scale for fuel. For gasoline, we have ethanol, and then we have diesel, and the other substitute is biodiesel. If without making great structural changes in vehicles. In Paraguay, we have started in 1990 using ethanol, and then after ethanol, we started using biodiesel, and always in the most recent years, we have been less successful with ethanol. Ethanol in the past year, we sold 500 million tons of ethanol and 20 million tons of biodiesel. Currently, ethanol is mixed in approximately 24, 27%, which is a good quantity of mix, and biodiesel had been in some years at 2%. And we had to move back to 1% due to lack of clear policies, of a clear guidance, because I always say the following. The support of Mr. Erasmo to be able to make the necessary investment and to have technology and efficiency in turn to be able to improve efficiency, we require a lot of investment. And this investment has to be followed by clear policies of clear horizons, where there are laws that can actually lead to foreign investment or national investment, and also the possibility of having a concrete future. Therefore, the biodiesel and real and renewable energy or biodiesel follows the government to be able to try to encourage all the legislations, everything related to programs of biofuels in Brazil, in the country. And hence we are currently working regarding that. That's Paraguay. So the reminding you that we're slowly starting to see results. This why? Because precisely there are important investments, as for example, investments in mega green project, a very important project. Another project like investment of a company called Kremer, a very important company worldwide, quite well known, whose focus is biofuel. So we are here at the Paraguayan Chamber of Biofuels and Energy and or Renewable Biofuels and Energy, and we are trying to get and to follow these kind of projects so that they can move forward and develop. Within exports, when exports tomorrow, for example, I think the biodiesel company that we have has an installed capacity that is much higher to what is produced today in the country, to what is marketed in the country. There is a law that forces importers and mixers of diesel and biodiesel, and it forces these producers to buy the product. But as I said, we're talking about only 1%. So this is being followed so that it can be implemented. And we're also creating some technical panels with the government to actually work on it very well. There is a certain instability that we currently are following to be able to improve. Today, the situation in Paraguay is this. We are certain that considering various advantages that we have in Paraguay, for example, income, which is 10%, and we have advantages like, for instance, of being exempted from several taxes uh, based on Law 1060 that provides several benefits. So there are many benefits in this sense, but there is a lot to be done regarding legislation and programs so that Paraguay can actually be an exporter of biofuel worldwide. I believe that in the forthcoming months and years, this will be possible. Well, this is what I wanted to share. Thank you very much. I do not want to be very long because I know there are many participants here, and I conclude. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Maximiliano. This is very, Maximiliano, the situation in Paraguay has been made very clear. So we have some viewpoints and some changes, and we can also work much more with these basic questions. Now, I'd like to give the floor to Mr. Carlos Alberto Mateus to know a bit more about the situation regarding the situation in Colombia regarding fuels. Well, thank you very much. A special greetings to all of you. Thank you very much for your initiative for this meeting that is so important for various reasons. First of all, I'd like to talk about biofuels that in Colombia represent ethanol and biodiesel producers in Colombia. Our federation is practically 19 years of age, and since 2004, 2005, it started ethanol production and then production of biodiesel. Hence, we have today a capability to serve approximately 10% nationally and approximately 8 to 9% in ethanol and 10% in terms of biodiesel. Therefore, with these figures, we are a great contributor in terms of energy. Therefore, we are here in actually envisaged in various public policies, and our goal is to have electric vehicles by 2030 in the Colombian fleet. The production of biofuels today would lead to meet this proportion until 2030. We're going to follow the whole process. However, we also need to make a transition. And here there is quite deep engagement of the Colombian industry to be able to project itself to its new fuels, precisely the renewable ones, and also if the focus is guided to this goal. Hence, this is very important to have the green production that will enable us to carry out such task. Therefore, we're going to get practically twice the number that we are expecting. And of course, on the other hand, as it's been mentioned previously, somebody mentioned that we have to be competitive. And this is very much related to the way things are considered. Today in Colombia, regarding diesel, biodiesel is below, the price is below. Why? Biodiesel does not incorporate environmental costs that biodiesel prices incorporate. It is necessary to understand all the necessary variables to be able to talk about competitiveness, because it's not just a matter of having low prices. Understand that in this sense, we need to actually get, we need to have economy and other topics so that we can have public policy models and of the population that can support us leverage this model. At the moment, for example, in Colombia, we're going through a process, let's say, of regulation. This thanks to regulation that has happened in Colombia. Somehow it's been able to move forward in this aspect, but we need to understand the new dynamics, the new demands of the market demands to make important adjustments in this regulation that allows us to move on. Definitely, legal and stability are very important. Legal support is very important. So they need government support so that with these elements, as we've mentioned, we can actually have investment in Colombia. And Colombia comes from the Colombian private sector. And therefore, what it means, the industry that we have today was precisely to have the regulating support in which we are working at the moment. It is also very important to have the combination or the blend. Part of what we find is that there are many agencies that have technical standards, local regulations, multilateral organizations, recommendations, and even the financial aspect that is so important in the multilateral bank that has projects that are in the mid-long term. All of it is very important because the investments that come regarding biofuels are high. So, and they require a lot of support and understanding on what is the outreach and how to also generate a mechanism that allows important opening regarding acceptance of products by country. In other words, recently we were on a certain aspects. We were discussing certain aspects. So therefore, we are trying to follow pathways. Well, there is perhaps some kind of a ban regarding the use of biofuels, but we are not talking about emission reduction. And these are things that are used and that it comes from, for example, palm oil. We who are in tropical regions have the palm oil as our product, and this should be a product that should have, this should be an important reality on other emitting items and other regions, how to have sustainable palm oil production and responsible production. In addition, there are two important problems here. The European companies that come here to work with fuels in these countries cannot use local raw materials, of which we have that has all types. Two cases we have. First of all, what is being generated is an effect of the European standard in Latin American countries, as for example, in other regions. And this has implications on international trade. But also, if the transaction is very expensive for European companies, so we have certain availability. If we have little raw materials and if they are produced based on the restrictions that Antonio mentioned, we're going to have a problem in the marketing of these products, and we have additional costs, and consumers would need to actually pay for that. And this is not within the European regulation and what is expected. Hence, in this context, it is fundamental to work in policies that are aligned and also work in common directives and guidelines to focus taxes. SAF is giving us great opportunity. The mechanism will enable us to speak the same language with many people when the production of biofuel is local for national production. And we see that the there is marginal production in many countries. Hence, SAF changes this scenario or landscape and allows us to see the model differently. And this may be a meeting point for the countries to which in the global market so that we can share ideas and actually try to get a common effect. Additionally, or in this case, almost wrapping up, it should be inclusive and it should enable the individual recommendations, and biofuels should be made with the materials present in each country and should be produced in a responsible, sustainable way and actually have traceability and certification. From there, we should have, let us say, a unification of common policies and also one of the mechanisms of promoting and support to be able to generate energy transition that is balanced and fast, because this is the fastest mechanism, because this does not entice any technology changes, additional investments in technology, except for what is necessary for production. Thank you very much.
De enorme relevancia y entonces quería, si les parece, en
Thank
los
you very much. These are hugely relevant topics. What about having a few minutes of discussion and you may interrupt, you may take the floor whenever you like. I would like to start with a question. The three talks that we've had so far regarding technology, availability, evolution of the technology to produce biofuels, the situation, the outlook for the future to reduce significantly production costs, both in terms of raw materials and also linked technology. And next, I would like to deepen a bit and talk about some concrete changes, regulatory changes that should take place so that we have a higher level of use of biofuels, because we've talked a lot about the fact that we need support, but also we need to gauge this support. What is the role that each player has? The governments have to be coordinated in each country. Who would like to start? Erasmo, Massimiliano, Carlos? Massimiliano, go ahead. Would you like to start with Carlos?
Gracias. No, yo creo
Or
que
even you,
Don Carlos y Maximiliano
Mr. Erasmus. Well, I believe that here, Carlos and Massimiliano have very well added to our introduction. We have a huge potential, but we need to go over a broader discussion on public policies. I think it clearly starts in each country because each country can actually draft their own public policy. But afterwards, the defense that we're making, that we've been making for many years in this important forum, inclusive, is for countries to be connected to talk about biofuels with a platform from the South, from South America to the world, both in terms of the raw materials that we're going to use, certifications as well. We need to talk more about this because thus we will effectively create a global market that is more balanced and fairer in terms of biofuels, because we're placing barriers and we don't know if actually the barriers that are being posed are effective or if it is protectionism. So we need to start talking clearly about these points. For example, I think the staff example is the clearest that we have, that we should broaden this discussion, because if we address this from country to country, it will be
40%
very
del
difficult.
mercado
The
a Latinoamérica.
airway industry, Brazil has a stake of over 40% in the aircraft industry in Latin America. Of course, Brazil's participation is important, but outside Brazil, there is 60%. So we need to talk about this as well. So we can broaden, seeing, for example, how the maritime transportation, transport, which is the one that people don't talk so much. There is new technology, but there is no regulation for new technologies like nitrogen, green ammonia, etc. And lastly, I believe that we need to talk about or talk more about cost. So adding to what Massimiliano and Carlos said, the cost of biofuel is not clear because we are not comparable to other biofuels.
And I have absolutely nothing against all other fuels. I believe we will be using fossil fuel for many years because we have an increasing energy demand around the world, but we cannot compare a biofuel, which is clean, renewable energy that has an impact of carbon that is very low compared to the price of fossil fuel. So for that reason, in many moments, biofuel are really lower than fossil fuel and have a very important economic role that is given to society. But we need to see, we need to do something else. We need to be dealt with differently. And effectively, we need to see biofuel as something that we need and also at a global level. And also, I want to say something important, which is about what we're doing, like a ping pong amongst ourselves here. This should be well understood with all the programs that have been carried out in Europe, where they many times focus on technology or efficiency, but there is still no clear program, structures, or anything like that. So it's hard for entrepreneurs to grow, especially when it comes to not having stability in the government administration. So this form, I mean, of hard predictability. So I believe it is important to work closely with governments, but also in terms of respecting international agreements that have been signed, and also a view on what is going on today in Europe, where we see something that we cannot ignore, which is a potential energy crisis, which is around the corner, and specifically because we want to really go beyond when actually we would already have today a very good solution for that. In other words, to industrialize biofuel and prepare countries to produce them, which is renewable energy, which is the future. And today, I see that as important in the short, mid term, but also long, because it's not something that is that solid. But to be able to actually produce only electric energy to cars, when actually nowadays a country like Italy runs on a high skyrocketing electric bill because of all the problems. So electric energy becomes very expensive and it's not sustainable nowadays. Today, sustainable is the production of biofuel because of the possibility of having much raw material, and also because there's no need to make major changes in engines, because when we talk about electricity, we always get back to diesel or to the carbon-based elements, because in Paraguay, where there is a good fleet of ships, because we do the transportation in the rivers all the way to the major ports. And these ships have been working and running on electric engine. And these electric engines, what are they being fed on? Diesel. So when you think about these ships being run on electric engines fueled by diesel, always dependent on oil. So this in the future will bring us problems, because today we have all the sovereignty in the hands of the oil producers, and we don't have the possibility of having a national product for Paraguay that is not an oil producer. Definitely that can be a process that will make us be hostage of the importation of such oil. It can be a killer to us. So that is not the future that is desirable to any country whatsoever, that has some loving care for nature, environment, and for the future of the next generations. I believe we must work and convey that, study, do that with discussions and studies that can show that, but the whole logic shows us that. I would bring two things that Maximiliano has mentioned. One, that we're all on the same path. I mean, to retrofeeding our own arguments, because we know well this topic. So that's why I'd like you to consider the following. Where I had the opportunity to get into the sector when it had a great international recognition, it was a boom. And I mean, then they'll say not biofuel. And then there was the boom of the other alternative energy, and for mobility specifically speaking. But when government and analysts realize that at the end of the day, the International Energy Agency says that when they realize that there is no zero use of fossil fuel that is possible, I mean, 14 billion of cars that will not be replaced. That means we will have to use all the possible realities, and biofuels are the one that has the best process for the transition. So we're starting to think about a different view on it. It will be us, as we will need. We need to be recognized again from this solution, and effectively with a study of the restrictions and everything that we have learned during the time. And in terms of the rejection we had, I mean, this allowed us to be better. So there are many mechanisms of certification because of diligency, the whole economic, environmental responsibility of the companies from the agricultural side, and also to have a balance of a production model that can even take us to use not only those fuels that do not generate alterations to safe food. So this is something that can really ensure the use, the food supply with the plantation of bioenergy that can really bring a balanced understanding of the problem. And that's where we need to understand in the short and midterm, because this is the space that we need to put that into play. And what we see is that the world has realized that cannot just take this as one. When we think about other energies, there are other dependencies. So where are the rare precise fields for photovoltaic wind energy? Where are they? In Europe, for instance, they're not. We don't have any more oil from Russia, but we depend on the wind from the north and the sun from Africa. So there are still complex mechanisms when it comes to interconnection. We need to understand that there's an interconnection around the world, but we are looking into autonomous systems, but energy is used as a weapon when there are conflicts, as we see in Europe. It's being impacting the whole world. So we must understand how to generate balanced mechanisms of cooperation, and also to really take the best out of the current products and how we can recover the recognition of biofuel within the scenario of transition of energy. So much investment has been done. The economy is growing a lot when it comes to that, and we hope to really take that on with a coordination of many sectors and countries and in the region that will allow us to really be more competitive and efficient when it comes to transition. Can I just make a very short comment? Sure. To complement a bit what Maximiliano and Carlos have mentioned, I mean, I have one or two examples that are very clear. As I said, we're great producers of ethanol, sugarcane, and I talked to Guilherme, who is the president of UNI, which is the producers of ethanol and of corn. This is a clear example. Brazil started recently to produce corn for ethanol, and there was no price or profitability for farmers. And this is a low carbon agriculture, and now it's a very important process that we need, where you can have also flowers produced and certified flowers. So this is the part of biofuel, and through this forum we need to be able to spread that information. I believe that many people do not know exactly how biofuel is produced in Latin America. It is definitely wonderful as we have it, because you can produce more food and also more energy. Just to reinforce this point, like, I believe that it's my position. I mean, we're not against the electric sector or against oil or hydrogen. Quite the opposite. We need all of these sources, but we need to discuss what each one has that it's best about it. For instance, I published this week in the social media that it's not possible not realize that an electric car that it's worth a fortune will stop running because there's no more electricity, and you need to take a generator that is run on gasoline or fuel to be able to charge it. So biofuel is a reality, and that's why this forum is very important. So those who are listening to us here and those who will be able to watch it later on to understand all the positive aspects when it comes to biofuel. And I would like to also add into this discussion, as I did mention before, Luis is here with us already. He has already connected. Luis Zubizarreta from Argentina. So also a very important country when it comes to biofuel, which is Uruguay. And in a few minutes, I will pass the floor to Walter. Luis, I pass you the floor now. So I'm not sure that Luis can hear us. Okay, thank you for the invitation. Can you hear me well? We get a choppy voice. Let's see if it will get any better with the connection.
Bien. Bueno, les agradezco los la verdad es que juntar sobre el tema de biocombustibles es
Well, to talk about biofuel is very interesting because at some point
tomar acciones
there
para
is an urgency for actions. Well, apologies. Sorry to disturb. You could perhaps disconnect your video because it's your audio is chopping. Thank you very much. Very well. I think this is a very important moment for us to talk about biofuels in a world in which there is an urgency
ambientales con energías limpias y
to
bueno,
seek solutions for the environment with clean energy. And Latin America, as has been mentioned recently, we have a huge potential to provide clean, green fuel with certification. We believe that some of the problems that I would like to shed some light on would be certain restrictions in the international trade that concern us. Therefore, we have certain problems to enter certain markets due to measures that are related to taxes and also related to certain duties. And together we have to try to find reasonable ways of providing visibility to this environmental value that products have. In addition, as to how we produce it, where we obtain raw materials, and how we comply with all the standards that exist in Europe and in the US. And therefore, I would like to mention the efforts endeavored to precisely demonstrate traceability of our production and also the production that, in addition to be sustainable, follows agricultural best practices. To speak a bit about Argentina, we in Argentina have practically 15 years of experience, and last year we had a law that was passed that was negative in our view. We believe that it needs to be reviewed. In Argentina, in addition to having huge biodiesel production potential and also bioethanol, we have ability to export it. But we also need, and we believe that this is part of our agenda, part of the agenda in this meeting, because we need to have a public-private interaction that put in perspective the potential of this industry for countries like ours. In addition, we should have certainty to necessary investments to be able to boost this industry. Therefore, I believe that one of the most important pillars to be mentioned in Argentina we have to work on quite a lot, which is actually working and moving from discretionality, because there is a game of not free competition market, and there's a market, and the energy secretariat sells and decides upon the price and sets the price. And we believe this is not a good model, and we need to leave it and move out of it, and we need to measure externalities that biofuels have. They are positive questions or issues for the environment and for agro-industrial chains. It's a matter of producing more energy and more food, and this goes side by side or hand in hand. There is nothing against it. Therefore, we need to work in industries in a scale that is more effective and that provide to consumers a high quality product, and that also it is possible to have competitive prices because prices are a variant that we need to take into consideration. Therefore, to wrap up my intervention, we need to think about caring for the planet, giving visibility to these projects, measuring clearly the environmental impact they have, and also providing the possibility that, of course, to have generation of industries in a competitive manner. Very interesting, Luis. There are 2 points that I would like to comment on. Let us talk about standards, for example, that you've mentioned a while ago, mentioned by the previous panelists on the rules and needs of having common standards. Something that seems to be quite interesting, which is something external that is positive, and how pricing should be introduced. Biofuel prices, those that pollute have to pay, and those that are actually sparing pollution must get some premium from the standpoint of market prices. Would you agree to talk about this now? I'd like to turn over to our last guest of this panel, and we would like to call him because it is very interesting to hear about Uruguay. We're going to talk about the project director of alcohol in Uruguay that is part of CAF. Walter, the floor is yours. Good morning. Can you hear me? Yes, very well. Well, I'd like to thank you very much for the invitation. First of all, I've been following the presentations on YouTube, and actually they are quite interesting. And we all agree on one point, what has been mentioned allowed us to talk about specific facts regarding Uruguay. In Uruguay, production belong to CAP, the oil industry in the country. And we have 3 plants, one producing alcohol from sugarcane in the north of the country. The other one produces alcohol from grains or cereals. And we also in Montevideo in the south, we have biodiesel production from soybeans. And also we have gone over each one of these peculiarities. And there was a law that was passed that talked about the compulsory aspect of certain producers. So they actually allowed the biodiesel not to be blended. So that was actually moving backwards in terms of biofuels, although the cut of naphtha and gasoline is maintained at 10%. We have a need alcohol anhydride, and we have oil seeds geared to the international market. And then we face all the problems that have been mentioned. So, and we have a restriction to make other things, as well as certain demands of the new directives of the European Union regarding raw materials and the volumes of acquiring of such inputs. So we think this initiative is important because we need to address it on another scale. Otherwise, it's really impossible. So now moving into external and how we're going. We had to hired with the Max all the analysis and the specificities of the 3 production chains, but it was not possible to communicate and obtain any national recognition from this valuation. In other words, we have no strategies of disseminating these externalities. And this actually leads people to move to, as in Brazil, they they see a gasoline pump and they just buy the cheapest fuel. This is a huge challenge to all of us. I'd like to comment that we started participating in a group in Mercosur in which we work quite a lot in the regularization of standards. And of course, on Monday and Tuesday, we took part in the conference of sugar and ethanol at Data Agro. And on this panel, I saw that we're participants. We have mentioned that anhydrous alcohols to be 1.6, and this is a market issue and a condition to have access to European standard when the United States has 99. And we have a lot to do, and there is also the need of uniting for that to be able to find. I'm talking about Uruguay because we are owners of fuels and we have the support of ANCAP, and also we work with oilseeds, and we also face restrictions of raw materials. There are problems of scale, of finding raw materials in the region, and allow us to be competitive in terms of cost, as Luis mentioned just now. This is the landscape we have at the moment that allows us to mention that this is an excellent moment for us to actually generate a single positioning in a place in the world that has the greatest potential of generating raw materials for production of biofuels. And to close, Uruguay has 95% of renewable electric power, and this is something to be highlighted. And it actually made the potential entrance of electric vehicles to be high. It has not happened yet. People talk about electric public transportation, but it hasn't happened yet. And we question ourselves. If this happens, other projects would also be possible because if we electrify vehicles, it will be necessary to find a source of electric power. Therefore, this is the landscape that I'd like to share with you, gentlemen. If you have any questions, I am available. Thank you very much, Walter, for your contribution. You've mentioned many interesting things. One of them is the work of this group within Mercosur to try to harmonize or to establish which would be the elements, the normative elements that are common that would have to be applied in the various countries. In this regard, we have a few more minutes, but in this time, over this period of time, let's go deeper into this question. Massimiliano, I would like to do the following. We were talking about external issues and how this could be incorporated regarding pricing. And how could we value biofuel through these externalities in market prices imposed by the market? And also these efforts as to generating common patterns in the region that can also be part of a general agreement. How do you view that? Uh, Well, as I've mentioned previously, first of all, we must have technological innovation to improve efficiency and competitiveness. We must have a certain predictability legally regarding these questions, and also a balance between offer and demand stability. Today in Paraguay, we have a legal framework that defines or sets the fuel price. Sorry, we do not have that actually. We have free competition. And therefore, regarding ethanol, corn, sugarcane, and biodiesel, especially soybean. But there are also industries that work with corn And oil byproducts is low, approximately 1.5%. Therefore, the idea that that we have in Paraguay is to be able to strengthen this industry to, at some point, get to our biofuel, considering the great quantity of mills that we have in Paraguay that are being installed in Paraguay. There are oil industries as Cargill, and Bunge. And we also have a number of, well, considering soybeans, the yearly production, if there is a good crop of 10 million tons, and these 10 million tons are transformed into 50-60% of exports. And this in terms of raw materials. 40 or 50% is being industrialized and exported as oil. And we're talking approximately about 1 million tons a year. Of this million ton, most is exported. So we have the possibility of industrializing not only for the domestic market, because the Paraguayan domestic market is not so large. We count on, well, we have 7 million inhabitants approximately. So quite or relatively small internal consumption. There is not great potential, but there is a great export potential when it comes to raw materials. So we see there is a need for it to be followed, as it's been mentioned previously many times, by governmental institutions. So there is some kind of clearer legal framework. But also, Paraguay is a good place. Therefore, industries are investing here. So they are submitting projects to be able to set up their plants in Paraguay to industrialize raw materials and also export such material products with all the benefits we have in Paraguay, with all the positive factors that I've mentioned, the production capacity of raw materials for exports. Therefore, I see very good opportunities as long as everything is followed by the government. Carlos, I would like you to, in addition to what has been said, I'd like you to comment on other points of interest. Yes, regarding the question that you've just asked, Massimiliano, I'd like to comment that Colombia developed a price regulating mechanism that recognizes in the formula the price, the market price, so to speak. However, we should say that in the past 30 years, the price would enable us to talk about the input, which would lead prices to a previous period. There have been some problems. That was the original concept, and the formulas was also developed for ethanol as well as for biodiesel. However, in this path and for different reasons, there have been some ceilings set that generated distortion in the market. So we've been working with the government to eliminate such price ceilings or caps to allow sustainability in the long term, and also sustainability not only for their businesses, but also investments that are going to be made in the biofuel businesses. But let us assume that in the regulatory model, there are mechanisms that enable recognizing prices that are prices or consumer prices, which is what we want, so that the whole production chain can have appropriate regulation and enables long-term production. Therefore, there is, and it is possible, and it has to be permanently negotiated. But this is a point that could be more commented further on. Now, I would like to turn over to and welcome, considering that we're practically in due time for the second panel. But before, I would like to introduce three people here
durante
that
este,
are
durante
here with us, that are not just, they have been listening for all this time. First of all, I'd like to turn the floor to Mr. Gustavo Santos, Director of OMT. He has a very complex agenda, so we thank you very much for your time. So if it is possible to share with us what we are talking about. So Gustavo Santos, who is the UN WTO Regional Director for the Americas. So the floor is yours.
We can't hear you. Unmute yourself, please. There we go. Can you? Yes. Can you hear me now? Great. Before and foremost, good morning, good afternoon, depending on where we are around the world. Isn't that right? Well, if there is a sector that is related to sustainability and to the need of adapting to an energy transition that is predictable, is tourism sector. In our region specifically, there is quite an impact. We are talking about one of the sectors that until 2019 hadn't grown over the economic levels of global economy and was being positioned of greater capacity of job generation. In our continent specifically has a need to reactivate the sector that was quite impacted by the pandemic. The numbers show us really a comeback where people want to get themselves ready to going out, where we see quite an interesting change, 60%. But we know that today there is no possible tourism when there is no sustainability. The impact of connectivity in development of tourism in our regions is essential and is strongly impacted by carbon generation. So if we do not find a reasonable transition that will allow us to reach the strategic goals that our sector has established at COP26, I mean, will be a very increase specifically for the air industry. So we have thought of connectivity, also maritime connectivity. To get to our countries, we must have long reach flights, which are the most impacted by the new measures. That way, biofuel can be a win-win situation because we generate commodities for this type of energy. And that way we would find a solution that is quite immediate when it comes to other technologies that are also being developed around the world that will demand a longer period of time, a technology change that will be more radical, which is not the case of biofuel that has a quick short-term application. And we as a sector have been committed to it in terms of reducing our carbon fingerprint, specifically in transportation. Our country, when it comes to tourism, it has been connected to that. In our continent, the dependency on connectivity is full, and it is our people who need that the most because tourism development will allow rural areas to be developed. Otherwise, this population will just run to capital cities and will bring the poverty pockets as it's a problem in Latin America. Tourism can be a way output, but needs a predictable energy transition. The role of biofuel becomes essential. As a region, we are producers and we have the capacity to position ourselves strongly. I believe that we are at a key moment where we need to focus on, which is tourism. I mean, to really bring new mass use, specifically for the rural areas that demand people to be rooted on their lands and not have migration to the cities where they can really be kept in their home places where they won't find a hurdle in converting to reducing to carbon fingerprint. So we need to find the solution. So governments will have to find quick process in terms of bio fuels for aviation. It can be definitely a short-term solution with efficiency to our regions and compatible to our capacity of producing commodities. So thank you very much for your intervention. And I would like to not waste more time and just we went over our time here. I know because of the time, I know Maximiliano and Mateus, and if you would like to spend more time with us, please go ahead and do so. And also, we would like to thank you all for being here with us. And now we will start with our second roundtable, moderated by Erasmo Batistella, who we would like to thank for that. And now I'd like to invite Gustavo, who has just gave his initial remarks. Also, we have Pedro de la Fuente and Fabio Kitlagalz. So Pedro de la Fuente, Senior Manager of IATA Americas. So we will carry on with the second roundtable. So Erasmo, please, you can lead the second roundtable. Thank you. It is quite a challenge to moderate these brilliant minds that know so much what they're doing. So thank you, Gustavo, for your initial intervention. And I would like to connect your intervention to a statement that I heard from the General Secretary of OTC, where you don't have tourism by walking to your destination, but flying there. I mean, it's with boats and ships. So energy becomes essential so that we can have a sustainable tourism. So to have you here with us is very important. If you allow me, I'd like to hear now the opinion of Mr. Pedro de la Fuente, as I believe it will be much related to what Gustavo was telling us about, because now we are talking a lot about SAF and how to really help the air industry, how to get to 2050. So thank you very much, Pedro. And it's important to have IATA and OT. See, we know that there is a very important to be with WTO with us here. So we want to understand how from Latin America we can help to introduce this segment and what is the role of in decarbonation of the air industry. Thank you very much, Erasmo. Thank you for being here. And I greet you all. And I'm here representing the international air industry. We are an association that represents 300 airlines and covers 65% of the air traffic. And we have a commitment with the environment to reduce the emission of CO2. So since 2021, we have been updating our plan to be able to mitigate emissions, and we have committed globally to have net zero emission for 2050 aligned with the goals of the Paris Agreement so that we cannot increase global temperature. It is definitely a big challenge, you all know. Aviation depends 100% on oil production to give the ignition to the engines that run $650 billion. But with a solid plan of governments, we can get to our reach of decarbonization, where we know that SAF will represent 65% of reduction by 2050. I mean, first of all, we need to be very clear as a sector. So we do not want to put into risk the food supply of the world and compete with products that will put at risk the growth of our population. And we don't want deforestation for the production of biofuel. That is not what we want. We need to make that very clear. So it's always important. We always have been looking to sustainability, which is the keyword of SAF or SAF, Sustainable Aviation Fuels, that is established in the International Board. When it comes to the emission, international emission, and this plan establishes the basic line. But what are the main criteria of sustainability that should be taken on by biofuels? First of all, to take into consideration that they need to be certified by an international scheme. Only 2 schemes have been recognized, SOB and SOC. And since we are an industry that works on many jurisdictions, we need to have a common agreement and harmonization of the SAF policies. And Brazil must have the same characteristics that you find in Europe, because the biggest benefit of aviation is environment, it's to the environment, reducing the emissions that are associated to this type of fuel. This is very clear in terms of the government of the Latin American countries, and the Caribbean has significant role in terms of efficient policies in developing and producing sustainable aviation fuels, but there's still much to be done and much land to seed. So we need to have a legal security to be able to have this on SAF. So in terms of long-lasting investment, so we can compete internationally. So we need to have support from the government, not only for smaller farmers, but also for those clients that will use fuels. I mean, we needed that, have that type of investment on the research of supply chains. So some crops that are very important in certain regions for biofuel, but today are still not certified internationally with the schemes that I mentioned. So it's important to work so that the certifications of biofuel can really commit to the international agreements. We need to also apply to the air industry the same incentive you have to the biofuel for the industry of sustainable aviation fuels, and we must do that once we have reasonable market values, to have enough production of the product so that we can also use in the different mixes, and also to have incentives as we have in Brazil in terms of not imposing high volumes, but goals of reduction of emissions using sustainable aviation fuels and giving the necessary infrastructure in airports and other places so you can avoid local monopolies with this type of production. We bet as an industry that that will be one of the essential points of decarbonization. We need to be able to increase what today is less than 1% of production in terms of SAF, I mean, in terms of getting to this amount. I mean, to be able to get to 450 billion liters by 2050. Without the support of the governments, this will be impossible to be reached. Thank you, Erasmo. Thank you, Pedro. That was all very clear. Very important, the air industry and decarbonization. It's a big challenge to go from 100 billion of liters to 45 billion, from million to billions. But when we talk about great opportunities, it makes me want to talk and hear Mr. Plinio, who is a friend and has a wide knowledge on biofuel, ethanol, biodiesel. So I always like to say that he is one of the forefathers of the most important programs in Brazil. How is Plinio seeing the role of Brazil in Latin America when it comes to biofuel, and how the success experience that we've had in Brazil with ethanol and biodiesel can help this great challenge that we have to produce more and more sustainable aviation fuels and certified ones? Thank you for being here with us. Thank you, Erasmo. It's a great pleasure to take part in this meeting here. I'd like to greet you all and all the speakers for their work. I fully agree with you. And I would just say that the attributes of biofuels are large and the potential market is huge, as it was already discussed in many other opportunities, including here. However, the challenge that is faced are two. One is the prejudice towards it, and the other one is lack of information. And when I talk about that, when it comes to lack of information, it has to do not only in terms of the population, among opinion makers, among policy makers, but this is the big challenge at hand. And to have biofuel recognized by its advantages, which is the fact that it allows the implementation that immediate as the drop-ins, and also proven results in terms of health and environment. There is no doubt about that. These are replicable activities, as there is no technology barrier that is significant. They are scalable, as you can start small and grow over time. All of this allows the car makers to really follow the most strict standards of emission. It offers longevity in terms of the use and making fossil fuels much more in a dissociated manner cleaner. Although all the advantages, there's a big challenge of creating public policies that are stable with predictability and credibility. In Brazil, the experience is wide. It started with ethanol in 1924 and more intensity after 1976. So therefore, we've been working with 4 to 5 years, so since the January 78. So Brazil has had mix, which has reached 20% of ethanol. And currently, as it's well known, 27%. within regular gasoline. We have adopted 10% of biodiesel mix. We should already be at 14, but we are at 10, just because of a wrong understanding from the government administration in terms of the advantages and the importance of committing to a schedule that had been previously agreed upon. And as Brazil imports much fossil diesel, we will have 18 billion imported when we use half of that with biodiesel. And we could also increase biodiesel with a broader margin, but the importance of biofuel and the recognition of its advantage comes with regulations that are well defined and elaborated that way. Although there has been a long track record in Brazil in terms of ethanol and biodiesel, only with RenovaBio in 2017, when there was the implementation, and as it was done, Brazil was able to, with certain delay, implement a regulation to give the stability and longevity and predictability to the program. And what is the importance of RenovaBio? Well, there are many, in many dimensions. First of all, because of the goal of decarbonization, once we defined a long-term goal, that way we were able to guide investments. And second, when it is allowed to capture by the biodiesel and biofuel producers, so that through selling the credit of decarbonization to the issuers and also the companies that trade fossil fuel that can pay for it. That way, the compensation is for decarbonization, and this decarbonization is an incentive to introduce innovation and energy efficiency and environmental one as well. But mainly, it allows to have the precification in the carbon market, following a system that is certified, and allows also that consumers, as also people and companies that will use biofuel, can have this for different types of transportation, air, maritime, and land, and it is subject to and is able to meet all the strict conditions of sustainability, fully certified by supervised agencies nationwide. And that is essential, not only when it comes to domestic use, but also for trade as a whole. And this certification allows biofuel to not be associated with deforestation, not associated to any other practice that is not related to sustainability. Quite the opposite. It will award practices that is increasingly efficient and that save the use of hydrogenized fertilizers and any other product that is linked to the carbon emissions. That way, this is a successful implemented practice in Brazil that will bring longevity and also value to this activity. And definitely it is possible to make it transferred to other countries, and it should be replicated, as also the Committee of Climate Crisis and the North American Congress has recommended to have adopted at a federal level in the United States with a program similar to RenovaBio.
Until 2031, Brazil, through Renova will be a decarbonization of 718 tons of CO2, equivalent to the emission of 1 year total of France, more than emissions of Canada a year, almost the total emission of Germany. All of this in a certified format. Therefore, this is a message. We could talk a lot about this topic. The market is very broad as we recognize that biofuels are carriers of hydrogen. Uh, this represents a practical, economical, and safe distribution of hydrogen because green hydrogen is beautiful. However, it requires the distribution and storage in high pressure tanks at between 500 and 900 ATMs. They are expensive, risky, difficult to handle. And I had the pleasure last month to go to IMO, the International Maritime Organization, to talk about this in London. And they are very interested in application of biofuels for the replacement of bunkers. This is another huge market equivalent to 5 times the production of biofuels, ethanol, biodiesel, total that we have today. Not to mention SAF, all the biofuel potential for land transportation, hence the importance of unifying standards, specifications, and certain vehicles that are discussed for the technology transfer, not only amongst Latin American countries, but also North America, US, Asia through India, Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines. Therefore, the market is very large. However, we should all be prepared to have a production that is certified, ensuring the compliance of the most important sustainability standards. I thank you for the opportunity, Don Erasmo, and I wish you a good webinar to all the participants. Thank you, Mr. Nastari. You are a professor in biofuels. Thank you for your participation. Thank you. People are joining and leaving because we are in a very democratic environment. With us, we have the national representative of the National Commission Productive Connected, Don Fabio Quetlas, is the deputy of the Productive Innovation Commission. Before giving the floor to Mr. Quetlas, I'd like to hear a bit more from Uruguay, the vision of SAF, because Mr. Quetlas, we're talking to Mr. Nastari from Yata, but SAF, everything about biofuels, but SAF seems to be a great opportunity to Latin America. And I would like to hear, because in Uruguay you have bioethanol, biodiesel production. I don't know how you're thinking about this topic of SAF, which is super important, as Mr. Pedro has very well explained to us. Well, actually, as I mentioned my previous talk, what has catalyzed the exploration of new markets is the non-mandatory setting of prices of biofuels in Uruguay. But we have been meeting with the authorities in Uruguay who have talked about the questions that may have. So we decided to follow 2 action lines. One, adopting SAF from the root of oil seeds and animal feeds. And now we're about to launch a tender for SAF production from hydrogen, CO2, and make a production of synthetic fuels. These are two work lines we have thought about, but Uruguay has lured, and Campi has on the radar the advancement of production of SAF by these two lines. One is short-term, because we have available technologies. It is a problem of raw materials and markets. The other one has a great challenge and advantages and has certain things related to hydrogen production and CO2 in certain plants, and also production of grains and cereals. Thank you very much, Walter. It's good to know that Uruguay is generating all of that. That is so much in line with the conversation today, so that we can have a more regional plan for SAF. As we've mentioned, and Pedro mentioned that as well. So things come from one country to the other, from one continent to the other. Now we would like to listen to Mr. Representative, Mr. Kedlas. In Brazil, we're talking about Latin America, but we use this Brazilian vision. We in Brazil at the Congress have a front line that works to defend biofuels. What is your vision? How are you working in the political arena in Argentina to implement, grow, and optimize and produce more biofuels? I also believe that it is very important to listen to you, your opinion as to how Argentina see the production of SAF. Very important. Thank you very much for being with us on this very important topic on this first Latin American Forum of Biofuels. Thank you very much to all of you, and especially to you for having invited me so generously for this work that we consider so important, so that we can share certain visions, experiences, and viewpoints so that Latin America can actually lead a transition, an energy transition that is intelligent, that generates more sustainability, more employment, more stability for companies, etc. Well, basically, I believe that in Argentina, the institutional situation, the politics regarding the defense of interests of bioenergy products is relatively less mature than in Brazil. However, we started talking to a group of representatives and senators of different political branches or parties from provinces producing of oil seeds and grain that are the base of the production of bioenergy. So much so that practically copying the experience from Brazil, we may have a bio bloc of representatives that advocate it. But basically, I would like to focus on these two moments that I'm going to speak this time I have to speak to talk about two things. First of all, I'd like to make a reflection. When we talk about energy, we're talking about development. In other words, I could not study the history of human development without studying energy. It is a basic component of the development of societies. The ability of generating an energy response in terms of knowledge, using available resources, the availability of resources for the other economic activities as security standards. Because when we talk about energy, we're talking about development. And we are here before an energy transition. I'm going to use an adjective here. It's an incomplete energy transition or an open one, considering that no one certainly is able to see what the energy world will be like in 50 years' time. The most important and consistent recommendation that we get from experts that manage to make a projection is that the best for nations is to have an energy mix that is diversified. an energy mix that allows countries to meet the four most important criteria in terms of energy. Sufficiency, to be able to have sufficient energy. Now, as you can see, sufficiency is critical. We see that in Europe, any kind of reflection that does not take into consideration sufficiency puts societies at risk, production chains, and put them in a situation of vulnerability. On the other hand, sustainability, ability of managing actually the various types of energy that make up the energy mix that is diversified. And to be able to get to this diversified energy mix, well, energy types compete among themselves in different circumstances with more or less advantages, with more problems, fewer problems regarding emissions, storage, etc. What we see is that the key to be able to develop here many energy families is related to an appropriate institutional framework that is stable, predictable, reasonable, and I would even add that should be simple, and that should also include incentives to be clear that it's not like it happens in Argentina. There are no pay tolls. In other words, that once we have a incentive regime, it should be clear. Mention how cuts operate, some tax premiums or incentives operate in a transparent, clear, simplified way, avoiding day-to-day interventional situations that may end up generating some noise, some bureaucratic noise in the productive chain. In this institutional legal framework, in any economic sector that needs to develop, we have two results, two outcomes that are very important. First of all, because considering this legal framework, we have the determination of the possibility of making investment and have profitability in various energy industries, not only bioenergy, but also for us and energy. But also because this profitability or these incentives will propose that it should be explained to have the possibility should be explained of having a future offer of different energy possibilities. Many of them work and to the limit of profitability. So, but if we have a legal framework that is appropriate, the I plus D would be more appropriate, and we could encourage from a legal framework, we could set a legislation that would yield to a more aligned mix, energy mix with the future, or better aligned with the future. As it's been mentioned in some debates in Argentina, I've been an advocate, and I'll keep on advocating biofuels. In the case of Argentina, we have a lot to provide. The energy prediction in small locations that are remote and distant from our oil productions with a combination of production and scale to complement situations where we have lower energy supply and an upgrade and enhancement of quality for biofuels and new generation. For those that are more environmentally compliant, that actually meet the value chains that are so important for these environmental standards. Having said that, this would be basically our focus with these instruments. We would like to set up a block of bio representatives replicating the Brazilian experience to be able to set up in Brazil, from Brazil to Argentina, to have this legal framework in the industry. And I personally believe that we can have very good news for the country. Thank you very much, Mr. Ketglas, a representative. Your vision has been quite important, especially important because we know how much you are connected to this economic development agenda in Argentina. And I believe that to us in the biofuel industry, it is very important for us to understand that Argentina will be working towards having this and attaining this goal, because politics is certainly connected to energy worldwide. This industry is absolutely strategic, and we, Mr. Representative, on this day have one of these goals, which is to work so that we can think, first of all, clearly, in your country, as it is your case in Argentina, but also practically together with that, thinking regionally, thinking on a regional scale, bigger and in block. We have Carlos from Colombia that is fighting to show how palm oil is produced in Colombia, how sustainable it is. Here in Brazil, we're talking about that our low carbon agriculture, how we produce sugar along with wheat and soybean in Brazil. And we have a retention of practically 2 tons of CO2 per hectare. So we are talking about so many positive external factors that we have in Latin America. And to conclude, I thank you very much for your participation. I'd like to hear a bit about your view on this. First, working in your country, of course, and then working together so that we can have this Latin American bloc as a very solid block of production and utilization, and also exportation or export of biofuels and clean energy. It is fundamental what you say, because in many of the bioenergy production chains, we need scale in providing inputs or raw materials, and also for the incorporation of technology that can be very burdensome, that a country may not have. And we may have a regional network, and we could transform into a reference on a world scale. We must be more intelligently integrated and facilitate the circulation of knowledge, generation of markets for new products, adapting this transition a source of problems, but also of opportunities. Many technologies that we may sell outside the block, we first give a regional dimension that allows some kind of global vision, and I'm very committed to this vision and this initiative. Thank you very much, Fabio, the representative, for being with us, for supporting us. We are reaching the end of this block. Before turning over to Spain with Javier, I'd like to comment that at the end of this forum, we're going to issue a document supported by 13 chambers from different countries, of the 6 countries participating here, precisely defending public policies, predictability, positive externalities of biofuels, and we're going to take this to the knowledge of the press. And we would like to keep on working together with each one of the countries on their positive features, but also working with the continent as a bloc to increasingly strengthen biofuels. On my part, I'd like to thank you all for having been with us in this important forum, and perhaps the next one may be in person with more countries, with more organizations, more chambers. But I have no doubt that today is a historical landmark for biofuels, for what we have done in the world where we are, and for the great challenge of the energy industry and the environmental challenge that we have. Thank you very much. And I turn the floor over to Mr. Javier. Well, millions thanks for this moderation, Erasmo, for all the comments. very valuable ones for all participants. I'd like to add to the congratulations to Mr. Batistella. Certainly, they will count. You will have the recording of this seminar on YouTube in Spanish, English, and Portuguese. It is already there. So I invite you all to publicize it and to disseminate the contents that we've discussed today. And of course, disseminating and generating coordination dynamics regionally, but also globally between Latin America, Europe, amongst other relevant geographies through our manifest and its communication and the forum and the association is totally available to you for anything you may need and whatever we can support you. And in the next few weeks, we will continue with our activities, both the event that we have held today and the high-level meeting on revitalizing industry and having once again this push that for years we've had, and that in the past few years there have been better and worse moments for the biofuel industry. And another important point that we talked about these external features. We talked about common patterns in the region or common standards. And one of our colleagues present today, Mr. Carlos, I'd like to mention what's going to happen in Cali next year. That will be the fourth biofuel conference in Cali, Colombia. Mr. Carlos Mateus there. We thank you very much to share with us in real time all the information on this initiative. And another point that we have been researching and surveying about to publish a study on the absolute compatibility between production of food and biofuels. It is a study that is regional and global, and all of this is going to be informed. We'll keep you informed. Good day and good afternoon. Have a great day.